Hey, grace and peace, everyone. This is Charles here with your Midweek Recharge. And this week, I want to talk to you about feelings. I all of a sudden get the urge to start singing feelings, but I'm not going to do that because that's not one of my gifts. But seriously, feelings is something that I think, depending on your background, your culture, is something that we perhaps embrace or something we try to damp down, that we try to squash, like it's somehow a lesser part of our humanity, that we're supposed to be logical and objective, and that somehow embracing our feelings makes us illogical or unobjective. And I'm not quite sure that I subscribe to that notion. I do, however, acknowledge and recognize that feelings are very much a part of who we are. And in fact, there's something that God enjoys us embracing and expressing. I'm reminded of a collection of poems, not Song of Songs, but a different collection of poems, Lamentations. Yeah, Lamentations. I know it's sort of a lesser known book, but it's still part of that five collection of books called the Megaloth. And Lamentations is a collection of sorrowful poems that reflect the feelings of Israel during the time of their Babylonian captivity and exile, and what it felt like to be, from their perspective, utterly abandoned by the Lord. Now, we know, based on prior prophecies, that the Lord was just allowing the consequences of Israel's choices to come to fruition. But for Israel, it felt like they were utterly abandoned. They had scoped out a piece of land that was promised to them by their God and were living in that land prosperously for generations. And seemingly every time they had a detour, took a left turn, they'd cry out to the Lord and the Lord would restore them. Except this time, they didn't get restored right away. And so Lamentations is just this utter anguish and despair, a crying out to the Lord, where the poet is expressing the feeling, the collection of all of Israel. And I know that there are times where you and I feel utterly abandoned, like perhaps in the middle of a global pandemic, where we're dealing with a health crisis, but we're also dealing with an economic crisis and a relationship crisis, and depression is skyrocketed, and we feel utterly abandoned. And what I want to challenge you to do this week is to embrace that. Embrace your feelings. Acknowledge and recognize the way that you feel. But don't stop there. See, the poet in Lamentations, though the poet went on and on describing and articulating this great pain and anguish, the poet also acknowledged that God was still God, and that God was faithful, and that God was just, and that God was kind, and that God would deliver. And so I'm going to remind you, feel your feelings, embrace them, acknowledge them, and remember, God is still God, and God is still good. Let that be your reach.